everyone, how's it going? Happy Monday. Welcome back to another DPP simulation session. My name's Ellie and I'm joined with Sandro, and we do also have Noseman around, but he's having some internet issues, so he may pop in and out, but he will be here with us. And of course, we have the amazing Kyle producing in the background. Cool. So, hey to everyone in the chat as well. Hey to Hannah, to Seth, to Max, to Stephen, to Matrix. How's it going, guys? Thank you so much for joining this session. So, a little bit of housekeeping to get through today, and then we're going to dive straight into today's session on some simulation things. So if you want to catch up with any of the events or the sort of the live events as well in person, all you have to do is head over to this page here, which is our events page on the Maxon website. So here you can see all the great stuff we have happening all across the team. So today we've got simulation, we have Ask the Trainer coming up, we have motion design in Paris, and we have a special Wacom event happening in England very soon as well. And if you ever miss any of our sessions, or if you want to learn something new, then you can head over to the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, which is this channel here. We can see all of the upcoming live streams that we have going on, as well as links to all of the recordings, which are also time-stamped thanks to Dr. Sassy. So shout out to Dr. Sassy. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this for us. I really do appreciate it. Noseman's back. Hey Noseman, how's it going? I was saying that we're having some potential internet issues, that you might be in and out.
Yeah. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
You are. We can.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm connected through a cell connection, so I'm gonna have a hard time replying to questions. So if anyone has any questions about anything you can DM me on Twitter. And if the internet comes back, I think they were chopping down some trees and they mistakenly chopped down I don't know, a few cables, but I'll be lurking in the background. So all your questions will be answered eventually. So if I just disappear, know that I'm there in spirit.
Well, thank you for joining us, even with the questionable internet.
Questionable. That's an understatement.
And don't worry, I'll try to do my best to take some questions and say them out loud from the chat. I'll monitor as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Sandro.
Only don't forget to preface all questions with a capital question word, as we usually do.
Yes, that's good. It allows us to just easier see these questions, and then we can help answer them for you. So also, if you want to get back on the topic of learning something new, then head over to this lovely cineversity.maxon.net, where you can see all amazing series. We have Getting Started series across all the Maxon tools, and just some really great videos on there to learn a lot of lovely new things. And finally, if you want to grab yourselves a t-shirt, all of these links should be dropped in the chat as well. The passcode is just Maxon Simulation. All you have to do is pay for the shipping. You can get yourselves a nice Maxon t-shirt and represent along with us. Cool.
So I just want to say, remove me from the stream. I'm going to try and connect through my iPad, so maybe I can type some answers if I can. So yeah, I'll be in the background. Bye-bye, everyone.
Perfect. Cool. Yeah, so all of those links are now in the chat as well, along with that passcode to get your free t-shirt. So today I'm taking over the next kind of like 55 minutes is going to be me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about creating a cloth simulation, but in particular focusing on how we can control and direct the motion of our cloth simulation based on using a field force. So we're going to start off by creating the slightly basic version of the setup, and then we're going to look at how we can make it more advanced by duplicating it and then linking certain field force objects to certain cloth simulations, and then so we can have two different types of motion controlling two different types of simulations. So I actually did a test render of this, which looks something a little bit like this. I'll play this through. So yeah, it's just a quick test render that I created, which uses this the setups that we're going to go through today. And we're going to build it all from scratch. That's what I like to do in my sessions. I like to create everything from scratch. And then we should hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to dive into some Redshift. So we'll look at a little bit of lighting and texturing, which is going to be actually a teaser for next Tuesday's live stream that I'm running, which is going to be doing this kind of lighting and texturing on this exact simulation. So think of this as like part 1, and then we're going to be doing kind of like part 2 next week. And I'm also going to share a project file to this, but I might be sharing that tomorrow.
That looks gorgeous. That looked gorgeous.
Thank you.
I could have seen some tearing. Would there be any tearing in this?
There was. So in this one, I tested out. So this one has no tearing, and this one has some tearing. So I just wanted to see and play around with the different types of things. And again, we can talk about that today, how we can add that tearing and how we can create this cool movement. So again, any questions, let us know. We've got Sandro here as well, who I'm sure will be able to answer a lot of your wonderful questions. Okay, cool. So as I said, we're going to build this from scratch. So we're going to start off just by creating our actual our cloth. And the way that we can do that is we can nice and simply, we can grab a plane, and I'm just going to adjust a couple of these settings. So one thing I want to talk about is we talk a lot about real world scale and real world sizing, which is really key for photorealism when it comes to like texturing and lighting, but it also isn't the most important thing. Let's say you're a graphic designer or a 2D motion artist, and you're just getting into 3D, you're just getting into simulation, and you're watching this tutorial or this live stream. Don't overthink too much about this real world scale. Worry more about creating and learning about simulation and just playing around with the settings. And so for me, these are the sizings that I'm going to go with this. And perhaps one of the most important things when we talk about simulation is our topology. So the segments that make up our individual mesh here. These are really key because the constraints or the cloth settings are really going to be dependent on this topology and the different points. So what we want to do is we want to make sure we're working in a high enough resolution that we get a really nice cloth feel and some nice ripples, but we also want to be low enough that we can continue to iterate and we can continue to make changes and not have it underperforming and slowing down in our viewport, because a lot of today is about iterating. So let's just go 100 by 25 for now. So I know that this is going to perform quite well in my viewport. And then what we need to do, we just need to convert this into cloth geometry. So we can right click and we can add a cloth tag to our geometry here. So now we have our cloth simulation. And what this means is it's going to interact with the gravity and it's going to be affected by gravity in our scene. But what we want to do is we want to control the motion ourselves. We want to be doing that with a field force. We don't want to have gravity affecting our simulation. So all we need to do is go to our project settings. So for me, it's Command D. I imagine if you're on a PC, it is Control D. And then we can just set our gravity to 0, and now it's just switched it off in our scene. And from here, what we can do is we can now take our field force, and our field force is how we're going to control the movement and the motion of this cloth. So let's just increase this in size a little bit. And so what we'll do here is if I just switch off my plane, we can use a spline, and the spline is going to be what controls the movement. So what we could do is we could come into our spline pen, and this works similar to the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator. We could just click and we could draw a spline. And so this would be the movement. But what we're going to do is, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a helix, because it's a nice, simple way of just creating some movement. But for you, what you could do is if you know exactly how you want your motion to be, you can draw this with your spline. So with my helix, what we can do is we can just adjust my orientation. And then I'm just going to play around with a few of these settings because I've already done this. So I know sort of what I want to have for my start and my end radius. My end angle, this is how I don't know if this is a real word, but it's how spirally the helix is going to be. So we want a couple more twists. So let's go to maybe like 1,000, and let's adjust my height to 500. What we can do, we can pull this down. And so now this is in the center of my field force. And so this is going to be, as we said, controlling my movement and my motion. Cool. So from here, what we need to do, we need to come into my field force and we need to connect everything together, because at the moment we haven't got the helix and the field force working together. So in the field force, we have a fields menu. And in here, all we need to do is we need to drag and drop our helix, or if you've drawn your spline, drag and drop your spline into this menu here. And what you might be able to see is we have a couple of lines going on. And so what we can do, we can come into our display and we can increase this line density. And these lines are representing not only the direction of the field force, but also the strength of the field force. So in the object tag, we can see we have a velocity type, which is add to velocity at the moment. And so what we want to do is we want to do add to velocity. And I want to talk about something here because I like to talk about the problems that I come across because I find it might be helpful for anyone who is doing something similar. So I initially, when I was doing this simulation, used set absolute velocity because it will also help to control the movement. And what I found is using set absolute velocity actually linked it closer to the movement. However, when you then use set absolute velocity, it actually causes more intersections and collisions. And Noseman was actually the one that helped me out with this. I said to him, I was like, why my collisions? I've set my collision passes to 12, but I'm still getting intersections. Why is that? And it's because I believe that the set absolute velocity actually just overtakes the collision passes, whereas the add to velocity will still allow the cloth pieces to see one another if we have more than one and then interact. So be careful when using set absolute velocity.
Yeah, it basically overrides all other forces and their stretchiness between each other. Yeah.
And it drove me mad. I was like, why is this not doing what I think it should do? But yeah, so add to velocity is the way to go for this particular simulation. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the strength value. And when we increase the strength value, so if we go to something like 75, you'll see now we get more intense lines. So we can see it's showing the movement direction and it's also showing the force strength. And at the moment, so if I get my cloth piece here and we just move that down to the bottom. So this is going to be our starting position for our cloth, just sort of down here. We can also see that we have not a very high strength value here, whereas we have a high value here. And so what we want to do is we actually want to have the same amount of strength or force or intensity over the entire area, the entire bounding box of my field force. And the way that we can do that is we can actually offset our range, start and end values here. So if we just offset it to 100%, you can see how that changes these lines. And so here we can now see we have the same level of force everywhere. Okay, so let's just switch this off. And then let's just press play and see what happens, because it's not going to be right. Okay, so as we're playing, we can see the cloth is actually moving in the wrong direction. And the reason for that is inside of the helix, the point order of the spline is the direction of your movement. And the helix spline actually the point order needs to be reversed in order for it then to control movement upwards. If you've drawn your own spline, you won't have this problem. But if you do find that, there is also a way of reversing the spline point order. If you just do Command C, and you can actually reverse your spline order that way, if you've drawn it yourself. Now, as you press play, we can now see that this is sort of working. let's just increase our timeline so we have a lot more frames to play around with, and we can play this through. Okay, so we're getting some movement. We're getting closer. We're getting something happening, but it's not looking that great. And so from here, what can we begin to change to art direct the cloth more and get a more interesting looking result? Well, the first thing I'm going to change is I'm going to add some turbulence or a turbulent effect into this movement. And so I'm not actually going to come in and use this turbulence, because the field force is what's controlling the movement and the motion. So what I need to do is I need to do something inside the field force to enable that. And the way that I can do that is by using a random field. And so let me just bring my display back in just so we can see these lines. And then in my object tag, I'm just going to select a random field. And you might have noticed if I come in here and if I switch this off and switch it back on, you can see it's actually slightly changing the direction of some of these lines. And so what it's doing is it's taking this noise type, which we've got on Perlin right now. It's got that noise pattern, and it's using that noise pattern to change the direction of some of these lines. And so what this is going to do, it's going to add a turbulent effect. If we have a small scale, so in here, if we go really low with our noise scale, we're going to have a lot of quite erratic movement, and we'll have a lot of lines kind of pointing in different directions. If we increase this scale, the same as if we increase the size of a noise, we will get slightly smoother results and a slightly larger noise pattern. So let's go with maybe like 250%. Again,
by the way, Elly, can we go with a quick question? The question is, because it's good to answer right now, how do I turn off force field line visibility? By setting them to 0, whatever it means.
So
it's about visibility.
I believe if I'm right with understanding the question, it's just by disabling the display box. Or we could just set that to 0. If you want to still see your field force bounding box, but you don't want to see the line density, then you can just move that down. Hopefully, I understand that question right, though.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
I'm back.
Yeah. Hey. Oh, he's back.
Everyone's gone.
From time to time. Oh, like completely back from a PC.
It appears, yeah. So, yeah, and it's just, I was trying to get it as fast as possible. You can even turn off the field force visibility if you want that to go away.
Yeah. We learned it from the last.
We learned that last week, didn't we?
Traffic lights. Yeah. Noseman taught me.
Cool. Yeah, so you don't have to work the line density on. I'm using it more as a representation in the live stream to show you what happens when we add like the helix spline and when we add things like the random field, but I will be turning it off now. So yeah, once we've created our randomness in here, again, if you've worked with noise inside of Cinema 4D, you know how powerful they are. So you could even come in here and you can really dial in this noise, or you can adjust this random seed value, again, which works really nicely for quick iterations and quick changes. So let's just switch this off. And then now let's see how that's made a bit of a change. So we can now see we have a little bit of turbulence going on here. But again, still, we're not getting that really nice cloth feel. And this is where we can dive into our cloth tag settings. So these, again, much like our segments and then much like our field force, will have a really key factor to change the look and the feel of our simulation. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these settings. If you want to know more about all of these, then link to Cineversity. Noseman did a simulation series on there, and he dives into all of these great things. I'm just going to talk about the ones that I needed to change for this setup, which is bendiness, stretchiness, and then we'll do probably a bit of thickness as well. So the way bendiness works is the lower the bendiness value, the more rigid your cloth is going to look, because it's going to be, the bendiness is how much the points of our topology are going to be allowed to bend from one another. Higher bendiness values allow for more bend. And this is where the segments, the topology are really key. So if we have a really high dense mesh, we can get a lot more of that bend and that cloth ripple feeling. So for me, I found a value of 200 works quite nicely. I would really recommend just playing around with these settings. It's the best way to learn. If you understand how they work, you will then just begin to start simulating, and you'll just know roughly the kind of settings that you want to use. Stretchiness, this is going to be from every other point, how much is going to allow a stretch from that. And this is also a really key setting when it comes to cloth tearing. So cloth tearing is on the stretchiness value. So if we go past 150% of that, it's going to begin to tear if we had this enabled. But we're not going to.
Can I jump in and say my nice little sophism? This is something that I do outline on the tutorial. The way the system works is that you can create situations where one constraint or one set of parameters goes against the other. And the way I explain that is similar to the immovable object paradox. You need to make sure that there will be a winner in terms of constraints. So make sure that you balance things properly. If you want something to tear, and tearing happens because of stretching, then if you have zero stretching, those two concepts collide amongst themselves. So make sure that the cloth can stretch enough so that it can surpass the threshold for tearing in order for it to tear. So you can create situations where they're absolutely non-physical. You can't do them in the real world because you think nature balances things. With simulations, we are actually, if we tell it to do two things that are opposing each other, you won't get the result you want. So make sure you don't make everything rigid, zero bendiness, zero stretchiness, zero this and zero that. You have to allow the system to have enough leeway to be able to carry on the effect. And I think I explain it pretty well in my tutorial. If not, ask the questions. My DMs are always open for users that have issues. Take it away.
No, thank you. Thank you for that explanation as well. Okay, yeah, so I'm just going to leave a stretchiness value of 2. And then I always love to add a little bit of friction so we don't have everything seeming as if it's sliding off of one another. And then the thickness value, so this is going to be the thickness distance from each point or particle. And so dependent on the size or the thickness that our cloth is going to be, it will eventually be 0.3. Will also depend on how low you need to go with this, but also consider how far you're going to be from distance from your simulation, because you might be able to actually get away with having a thickness value of slightly bigger, therefore preventing extra collisions and interactions. So for this, I found 0.5 worked because I'm far enough away that I can't actually see the kind of a 0.2 centimeter difference. So these are the settings I went with. And also, one quick thing I want to talk about is a mask setting. The mask setting is really, really key when you're working with multiple different types of simulated objects or simulations in the same scene. So for example, I recently got asked, how do I create a rope net? So using a rope simulation on some splines and create a rope net and have a ball come down and land on the net. People were saying the ball always falls through it. And so what you need to do is you need to have different mass settings for those two different simulations. So if you want the rope to catch the ball, the rope needs to have a heavier mass than the ball does. So again, sort of like Thanasis was saying, you sort of need to think about these settings in the way that you want the actual final look to be. So bear that in mind when you are adding things together.
I saw that tutorial, by the way, a very good finding. Although it is a whole other story for rigid bodies, because mass is calculated somewhat differently, body-based, not point-based.
Cool. Right, so let's just have a quick playthrough, and we can now see that we're getting a little bit more of a sort of a cloth-like feel. But again, the motion isn't interesting, isn't great. It also isn't sticking too much to the helix. So how can we fix this? Well, strangely enough, I'm actually going to increase the strength value. So I'm going to increase this to something like 100. And you're probably thinking, well, now this is just going to fly straight through the helix. Yes, you're right. What we can do is we can actually compensate for this additional strength value by adding some dampening to our simulation. So again, if we just go to Command D and under the simulation tab, here is where we can do things like increase substeps. We can increase collision passes if you have intersections. And then we also have this dampening value. And I've heard this described as the more you increase the damping, it's as if your animation is happening underwater. And that is a really great way of understanding what this does. So if I put this to a really high value, you'll see how it's really slowing down and dampening my animation. And so a little goes a long way. So let's go to something like 5%. And now we can see we've dampened this. And now we're getting a little bit of a smoother sort of animation, which is now also sticking to the motion a little bit better. Okay, so from here, what can we do? Well, we can actually begin to add some more cloth elements, again, to add some variation and make this look a little bit more interesting. So with my plane selected, we can drop it inside of a cloner. Let's just sort of come down a little bit. Set this to linear mode, and then we're going to have no position in the Y. So we've got a count of 3. And at the moment, all 3 are on top of each other. So what we need to do, we need to just slightly reposition them and move them out. And a really easy way of doing this, and also a way that's going to allow us to iterate really quickly, is by using a random effector. So if we take the random effector, you can see how it's just separated these out nice and easily. And then we could even add some rotation if we want to. So now they're going to come in from slightly different starting positions and again, be interacted by slightly different parts of my field force. So let's just switch that off for now and let's play this through. Okay, so when working with the cloner and when you're creating duplicates of your simulated objects, it's really important that we actually have the cloth tag, we move it onto the cloner. So what you notice is as I press play, it doesn't actually play. And so what we need to do, just drag that onto your cloner. And now when we press play, it works perfectly. Okay. So we're getting a little bit closer. But again, what I might do is I might actually come back into my plane and I might adjust my segments again. And this is because this is still a little bit too low resolution. We're not getting that nice cloth feel. And so the higher you go with these segments, when I say the better your cloth is going to look, the smoother it will look. But again, don't go too high, because too high of resolution might then end up slowing down performance. And when it comes to constantly iterating, we don't want to have to wait minutes just to see the outcome of the changes that we're making.
May I?
Of course.
Yeah, there's a general rule. If you go to your simulation settings, if you can, Elly, and show, right. So here we have substeps, iterations, and smoothing iterations. There's a general rule that says that if we have 200 and more substeps, our simulation is prone to breaking because it creates so small increments of motion that a GPU cannot handle such small scale. Of course, that depends on your scene size and all that. So the general rule is that always use a maximum of total 200 substeps. But there's a catch. The total substeps is not the number you see in the substeps. You have to add the iterations and the smoothing iterations. So let's assume the iterations are 2 and the smoothing iterations is 1. We have 2 plus 1 equals 3 times 20. That's 60 total iterations. That 60 number is that number you need to be very careful not to exceed 200. And again, take that with a grain of salt. Terms and conditions apply and disclaimers and all that. But generally, your best simulations, as far as I have seen, would be from the default 20 substeps and maybe 1 or 2 of the iterations, smoothing iterations, which means a total of 2240. up to, I would say, you can put 60 or 80 max of the substeps, and maybe then 1 + 1. But always remember that these three things, you have to add the 2 ones on the bottom, multiply them by the top to see the total iterations. And yeah, that's the general rule that I was told by someone that knows how this stuff works. I think it's because he was one of the people that made it. So be careful. You can always experiment. So don't be afraid. Put huge numbers there and see what happens. It's always good to find those limits. But the general rule I was told was that 200 is the upper limit.
And I agree with what you say there. Just by testing out values, that's pretty much how I learned how to play around with simulation and understand what the settings do, by just exploring the different numbers and trying to break it.
To all the viewers, be careful not to blow out your computer while testing out, like experimenting.
We've all been there. It's how I know what not to do.
One does learn only from experience.
Cool. So yeah, now we've just sort of adjusted our settings, dropped this inside of a cloner. We now have this kind of simulation happening. And again, it's slightly slowing down just because I increase those segments in there. And so it's looking okay. I'm going to leave it there for now, and let's just go NA. Okay, so we can all probably agree this is looking, it's not looking the nicest geometry or the nicest mesh. So what we can do is we can actually, we can add some thickness and we can up-res this with a subdivision surface. And the way that we can add some thickness, and the importance of thickness is mostly really to get a nice look. And so when it comes to texturing, if we don't have any thickness here, the texturing just won't look that great. The reflections won't look great. If we're working with refractive materials, we want to have a certain element of thickness. And so we can do this by using a Thicken generator. So again, I'm just holding the Option key every time I select a generator. And then we can just adjust our thickness. This is the same as if you want to be using the cloth surface. So before we had the Thicken generator, we used to have the cloth surface, and we would do that. And then we can easily up-res this by using a subdivision surface. So all that's done is it's now subdivided our geometry. So if I disable and enable that, we can see we now have a much nicer and smoother looking mesh. And so what I like to do, I often like to work relatively low res just to work out how my simulation looks and get it to a point where I'm relatively satisfied with it. And then I will up-res it later on. Okay, so let's just work with those two off for now. Okay, so what can we do now? Well, the way that I look at this and the way that I kind of have an idea of how I wanted this design to look, it still looks too uniform to me. It's still this, it's the same cloth pieces are being controlled and defined by the same field force and the same helix. But what if we wanted to, let's say, duplicate the setup and have some of the cloth pieces being controlled by one type of motion and the other cloth pieces being controlled by a different type of motion? Well, we can do that relatively easily by just duplicating this setup, and then we can have one cloth tag look at one field force and one cloth tag look at the other field force. And so for this, I'm just going to rename a few of these things just so I know which is the first setup and which is the second setup. So I'm going to take everything, highlight every single thing in my scene, and go Option G. That basically groups that into a null. I'm going to call this setup 1. And then I'm going to Command C and then Command V to copy and paste it. So we now have our two setups in our scene. And so let's just set this to 2. The naming here is important mostly for the field force, the helix, and the random. And then what we can do, let's go right back to the start of our scene. So now we have the two setups, but at the moment, everything is in the exact same place. But the whole point of this was we wanted to have a secondary type of motion to control a secondary cloth sim. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this second helix and I'm just going to change some of the settings. So I've just added some rotation. We could even come in and we could add and increase this end angle if we wanted to. We could come in and we can control the height bias. So all of these settings, again, remember, is going to be controlling the cloth motion. We can then come into the field force. And then what I love about working with things like random fields and random effectors is they have a seed value. And so it allows me to change and iterate without having to really do a lot apart from change one value. So now we have a different seed type, a different noise pattern on this second field force. And then all we have to do now is, let me go into my cloner. I'm going to change it to a count of 2. So we're going to have 4 pieces. And then in my second setup, in this random, so this is the random that's controlling the start position of my cloth. Again, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to change the seed value. And so we can now see we have our 4 pieces of cloth here. The important thing, the really important thing here is we don't want to have any intersections. So we don't want to start with any intersections here. So something like this seed value works fine. And then finally, what we need to do is we need to link the different cloth simulations to the different field force. So in setup 1, we can come into our cloth tag. Under forces, we can go to include. So we want it to only include field force 1. And then in my second setup, I want it to only include field force 2.
I wanna shout out, and sorry for interjecting, but it's quite important.
Oh, you're good.
What I want to say is there are certain things that, you know, most people don't understand. The genius of Maxon developers is that you made a copy of a whole hierarchy, and all the links relative to the objects, the MoGraph object link, the field forces and all that, the fields, the random fields, they're actually connected properly in the copy. You don't have to go and relink anything. And it's an understatement to say that this takes a lot of work to make it work properly. And it's amazing how these kind of, you know, simple things just work. So the only thing you actually had to do was just go and say, okay, let's exclude the force from one and exclude the other from the other, or include in one, include the other. That was copy, paste, and 2 includes, and your setup is done. All the other stuff is a matter of style. But as far as the functionality, that's it. You drag copy, or you copy and paste, and you click 3 buttons and everything's done. And I want to stress that a lot of work goes into making Cinema 4D work in that very simple way. And I just wanted to say that huge shout out to the developers doing a magnificent job. Thank you.
I'm totally joining, and it works the same way, even with constraints and even with some espresso linking instancing, and that is crazy. You know, that becomes crazy when it's interlinking and it still maintains this order.
Absolutely. No, it is incredible. They do a very good job, a very, very good job. And then we get cool things to play with. Okay, cool. So yeah, now what we've done is, as we've duplicated it, we've now linked cloner cloth setup here with this field force and this one with this field force. So now they're going to have slightly different types of movement and slightly different motion. And again, I've just disabled the thicken and the subdivision surface so we can see it's playing nice and fast still in our viewport, and we can get an idea. Okay. Cool. So now the next thing is, the way that I wanted this to look was I wanted to have a focus object. So let's say you were working in, I don't know, product visualization, or for like a shoe company, you could have a shoe in the middle of here, and then the cloth could come in, be swirling around it, and then coming out of shot. That was the idea behind what I wanted to do. And so what I chose to do was I chose to use the Adidas logo. I like to play around a lot with brands, so Nike, Adidas, etc. in my scenes. And so here, let me just steal the Adidas logo out of this final shot. I'm just going to paste it inside of here, and let's just remove everything so we can build it all from scratch. So this is my focus object. Is going to be something to highlight, something that we can then do some camera animation around as well. And the way that I created this, it's another thing I wanted to talk about, is in Illustrator, I just drew a path of the logo, brought that in. And when you bring an Illustrator file into Cinema 4D, there's a couple of different things you can do. You can bring it in as a vector object, or you can bring it in just straight away as a spline. And then what we can do is we can just put the spline inside of an extrude. So what I did, create the Adidas logo and put that spline inside of this extrude here. But the important thing here I want to talk about is a couple of things actually. And this is based off the issues I came across when I was doing this design last week. So the topology is also quite important of the collider object. It needs to roughly match the objects that will be colliding with it. Otherwise, if we have flat n-gons here, we can have intersections happening. And so you want to make sure that you either do it with like the remesh tool. You can fix the topology that way, and you can retopologize it and get some nice quads. Or you can come in and we can go to our caps. We can go regular grid, quad dominant, and we can begin to create a higher resolution mesh this way. And also on the kind of the flip side of that, I found with this particular setup that working with a spline and a generated mesh, still I had a few intersection issues. Even when increasing my collisions and my passes, I still came across problems that I couldn't fix. This may be because of limited knowledge, or it may also be because whilst it's trying to generate the mesh, it's also trying to calculate the simulation. So it's trying to do these things at the same time. And even with the simulate before generators enabled or disabled, I found that it didn't work as well as just converting it into a polygonal object. And so what we can see here is we have this main polygonal object. The way that we can do that is just right click, current state to object, and you get this single mesh here. And so I know a lot of people like to keep things procedural. In this case, I didn't need to, and it also fixed a lot of problems for me. So I was happy to convert it. So that was just something I wanted to talk about because, yeah, it again was a big problem I came across when I was playing around. Cool. So what we want to do is we want this to now collide with our cloth simulation. And so the way that we can do that is in our simulation tags, we can just add a collider. And now it's going to interact with our two cloth sims as it comes through. And I've put it in a place where I can see already the splines, the helix are going through it. So chances are my cloth is going to interact with it as well. When my cloth interacts with this collider object, then my collision properties come into play. So we have bounce, friction, and stickiness. We don't use stickiness, and I don't want any bounce. I don't want the cloth to hit the logo and then kind of bounce around. We don't want that. But we do want a bit of friction. I want it to come past, and I want it to sort of slightly hold on to the logo a little bit. And so inside of here, we can just add a friction value of 1. And then we can just play this through, and we can see how this looks in our scene. So we can see the cloth comes out. Let me just sort of pull out. And we can see it's starting to gather. It's holding on a bit too much. So I already know that the friction value is too high. And so we can come in and we can then start playing around. And so at this point, the technical side of the setup is done. Now it's a case of you being the artist and you being the designer and figuring out what you think you need to change in order to get that final design that you are happy with. And when I tell you, I spent probably 30 to 40 minutes playing around and iterating to find a design I liked. And so we can come in and we can play it again. And again, another reason why we're working low res is it allows me to continue to just come through. And yes, the characteristics of the cloth will be different when I up-res it, but I can still get an idea of the motion and the movement. And that's the bit I'm trying to perfect right now, not necessarily the look of the cloth. Okay. So the things that I changed and things that I chose to change based on the setup was the starting point of the cloth I found was really key to the final look of the design. And so as we know, we've set this up in a way where we can actually iterate this quite nicely. So we can come into our random effectors and we can begin to just play around with the seed value just to define the starting position of my different cloth pieces. So let's maybe go something like that. Again, we want to make sure we're not having any intersections. So let's just sort of play around and see something that we like. No, let's go with this. Again, I don't want to spend too much time just iterating while you all watch, because that's not very fun. So let's play this through again and let's just see what this looks like. Let's see how this comes in. So again, we're getting a little bit of it holding on, which is exactly what I want. And then I want it to sort of come past and then all fly away by the end of the simulation. Okay, so that, for me, that's good enough. But I promise you, I spent a good amount of time just tweaking them and perfecting and just playing it over and over and over again, because the motion for me is the bit that's the most important thing in this particular shot and in this animation. So another thing that we can do before we kind of get into a little bit of camera animation is actually inside of my field force. Inside of my random field, so remember this is what is adding extra element of turbulence to our, or randomness to our motion, is we can actually add some animation speed. So now this noise pattern is going to be animated as my cloth is also animated. So maybe we can just do a value of 50% in these, and then we can play this through again. And so the noise pattern will be moving around. So we're adding more of this turbulent effect as it comes round. And again, this is going to change how all of this is moving and interacting with my object or my product in the middle. Okay. Cool, so this is where we're at right now. So let's switch back our subdivision surface and our thicken, just so we can see how this is looking. And it actually, I'm quite happy with it. It's not looking too bad. Again, I would iterate a lot more. And if you're doing this, I would continue to kind of play around with some of these settings and then maybe even up-res the plane a little bit more. I think my final one was 180 by 60. So I didn't even go that much higher than what I'm at now. And I was still happy with it. Okay. So now let's add a little bit of camera animation. And it's going to be really simple camera animation. We're basically just going to pan out and we're going to rotate. And it's going to show that a little bit of camera animation added to this simulation can really go a long way to add just an extra little nice aesthetic layer to it. So let me just go into my render settings. I've just got a 2K preset. If I can click that, there we go. So yeah, 2K preset, just 1920 by 1920. I render a lot of things at this purely because I do a lot of stuff for social media. So 1920 by 1920 allows me to do a 16 by 9, 9 by 16, and 1:1 ratios for a lot of things.
But you have to go smart with your composition so that you can then crop it.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. I'm always thinking about Instagram. It's always on my mind. Cool. So I'm just going to add a quick redshift camera. And then I like to work with quite big focal lengths. So I tend to go between 80 and 120. Again, this is just because of aesthetics and how I think things look. I like to break rules sometimes because that's how we can create and explore different styles and different aesthetics, is by not necessarily following every rule. But that's just my opinion. That is not a trainer fact. Cool, so let's just get that grid overlay just so we can center this at the start of our simulation. Maybe something, let's go a little bit closer, something a little bit like that. And so let's just set some keyframes for our Redshift camera. And at the start of our animation, so maybe something like frame 360, let's go straighten this up. And let's just pull this out, maybe something a little bit like that. There we go. And then we just re-keyframe the ones that I changed. So now let's play this through. So we're going to have a little bit of camera animation. So it's just panning out and it's rotating as our cloth comes in and it interacts. We've got that little bit of friction. I may even increase the friction just so it holds on to that logo a little bit more. And then what should happen is as we get to the end of my animation, we want the cloth to be out of shot. So we're almost there. So what I can do is I can actually just come in, and if I want this to be a little bit faster, I can increase the field force strength. So we can come in, we can go maybe 125 on the field force, 125. And now all that's going to happen is the force and the strength of that movement is going to be a little bit faster. So it's all going to happen a little bit quicker. So we have something a little bit like this coming through, interacting nicely, and then coming out of shot. A bit like that. And now it comes out, and now we just have the logo. Perfect. So that's looking okay. I might even increase the friction again because I want it to hold on a little bit. While this is playing through, I'm going to find just a nice looking angle, and then we're going to do a little bit of redshift because I've got a couple of minutes left. I want to do a teaser. I'm going to do a little bit of a teaser for next week. So let's maybe find a shot that I'm happy with. I'm really happy. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in to the final version that I did. I'm going to play this through. It's the exact same setup, here. All that it is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to find quite a nice looking still shot so we can do a little bit of lighting and texturing. Let's go something like this. Okay, so we can see exact same setup. Cool. So yeah, as I showed at the beginning, just for anyone who's joined a little bit later, next Tuesday, I'm doing a how to light and texture this kind of shot to make it look a little bit like this. And so I thought with the last 5, maybe we'll do like 8 minutes, I'm going to do a little bit of lighting and a little bit of texturing of this shot, just to show you how that can really just make these relatively simple-ish looking simulations just look really like 10/10. Cool. Let's switch these on. And let's come into Redshift into my render view. Let's kick this off. Let's see how this looks. I think I switched all my lights off. Yeah, so I switched all my lights off. Let's get rid of those materials. Okay, and then finally, let's get rid of this as well. Okay, right. So the way that I always start with lighting a scene is by just throwing in a dome light. Really great way of adding some ambient lighting all around the scene. And then in the asset browser, I'm a big fan of the asset browser. You can find models, materials, texture maps, loads of really great things, node setups. We have a bunch of HDR images, and relatively recently added, I'd like to say recently added because I've only come across them recently, are these really cool like softbox setups. And these, when you're working with cloth, and you have those cloth ripples, can create some really, really great lighting effects and some great reflections. So let's just drag and drop this into my texture here. And then let's just play around with the rotation of my dome light. And so you can see here how this is looking in the scene. And just find something that you are happy with. So maybe we can play around with that a bit more. Where did we get to? Let's go something a little bit like this. So we've got these nice sort of high contrast, we've got some bright areas, we've got some real dark areas, which I enjoy playing around with quite a lot. And I'm actually going to leave the settings as they are for now. So we're not adding any extra color, which is great. And then I always like to couple the the dome light and the HDR setup with some area lights. One, area lights are a really great way of adding some again, extra lighting, bring up some nice areas. We can add gobos, but we can also, what it's going to do, it's going to bring out more of that detail. So if we add some displacement or if we add a bump map, the area light is the thing that's going to bring out those details much more than the dome light ambient lighting will. So I like to work with the two together. So one of my go-to tricks, if you've seen any tutorial or live stream that I do, is I love to add a null, and I love to just use the dynamic place for the null. And this is going to be where I'm going to target one of my area lights to. So if we grab an area light, it's added into our scene. We're going to hit this little arrow here. We can go to add target tag, and we can just drop the null inside of there. And then now it is my lovely, lazy way of directing an area light in our scene.
I never knew you could actually use a place tool with a null, because I thought it goes from a bounding box, and null is basically empty. Obviously,
yeah,
you can.
Yeah.
Live to learn.
Cool. So yeah, we have this area light in here, that's just directed here. And the things that I like to do is I like to play around a lot with the spread value. So inside of here, we can reduce this right down. And what this does is it's going to give a more of a direction or a spotlight to our area light here. And we can create not only some really great lines, but some really harsh shadows as well. And it's just about being creative and playing around with this look. So let's just maybe add a little bit of a fall off to that. And as we pull this round, we can see again, we can just create some really, really interesting shapes inside of our cloth sim. So we just pull this down. And what you need to do is when you're working with, or I'd recommend when you're working with an area light at a low spread value, because it is a more direct light, the lower the spread, the more intense this light is going to be. So as you can see, this is really, really intense. So we just need to pull this down to compensate for that. And you may find if you're getting to really low intensity values, you can then use the exposure stop, which is like a multiplier or a divider for your intensity. And now we've got the really cool sort of shadow effect happening here. Okay. So again, I just want to do a little bit of teaser. I don't want to go through all of the lighting. I'll save that for next Tuesday. But this was sort of the starting point I went with before adding, again, some more lights and some gobos and playing around a bit more with the spread and the intensity values. And then just as like a final bit, because I know we're kind of at the hour, let's do a very quick bit of texturing on here, because it's my favorite thing. I'll tell you now, it's my favorite thing to do is texturing in Redshift. So let's throw this this new material onto this Thicken. So now we can see it on here. I'm just going to open it up. And we're just going to play around with some of our base properties. So this is when I start creating material, base properties is exactly where I begin. And that's what I would recommend. So based on the style material that you're creating, you want to dial in your base properties first. And so for me, what I like to do, I like a really nice sort of diffuse cloth. And so what I do is I change my diffuse model to Lambertian spheres. It works really nicely for porous materials, so like sand and rock. And so what I find is aesthetically, I think it looks really nice for cloth as well. So we can play around with our roughness and we get this really nice, just smooth looking material. And then we can come in, we can change our color. Or what I ended up doing, again, what I'll talk about on Tuesday, was I created a texture. Let's get rid of that. I created a texture for my cloth, again, just to make it look a little bit more interesting. I like to play around with textures, and I thought a single base color really didn't make the animation kind of pop as much as it could. So I just created this quickly in Photoshop, and then we can actually set that as our base color input in Redshift. So if I just plug that into my color, we can now see that is on here, and we can actually, I think I might even need to rotate it 180 degrees. There we go. So we now have this controlling the base color of that. And then we can even use a ramp similar to a gradient in Octane. use this to recolor and invert some of these values. So we could pull that up, and then we maybe want to have a little bit of an off-white kind of look here. Cool, right, so let's add, with a couple of minutes left, let's add a little bit of detail to this. And my favorite way of doing this when working with cloth is the tile shader. So with the tile shader, let me just solo that, and let's just set some of these values. So we've got our grout color to black, and then we're going to have a mid-gray for our tile color. And in the pattern, for a nice cloth style pattern, we can create weave. And then what we need to do, we just need to adjust the U scale. So maybe something like 0.2. So now we can see we have that proper weave pattern. So it's now fitting the U and the V size of my cloth. And then we can use global scale to scale it down uniformly. So I'm going to go to 0.3, mainly because it's still going to be visible then on the stream. I think normally I'd go to maybe like 0.1 or 0.2, but again, resolution, screen, etc. I want it to be visible for you all. And now what we can do is we can tell Redshift to consider this tile shader now as a displacement texture map or a bump texture map. And the way that we do that is we can just take the displacement node, or we can take the bump map node. And then we connect these together. So tiles into bump map input. And then that goes straight into our bump map input that we have here. And then we unsolo that. We can now see we have that bumpy surface detail. And then what we can also do is we can use it to control displacement. Let's plug that into displacement. And straight away, nothing actually happens. And this is because we need to set up some object tags. And so let's go into our Thicken and let's grab the RS object tag. And inside of here, when we're working with displacement, we want to override our geometry, and then tessellation is our subdivisions. And so this works hand in hand with displacement. So let's just set this to grayscale. As you can see, we don't actually see any displacement at the moment. So let's switch that on. And then now we can see we're getting some displacement in our scene. Let's actually come out of this camera. I want to get really close in here so we can see this detail, because I want to show you something that's pretty cool with tessellation. Okay, cool. Here we go.
Oh.
Right. So this is what we have. This is our displacement at the moment. Let's get a little bit closer. Here we go. Right. So we have our displacement. We've got our displacement scale. And we have things like that. And we have our tessellation going on. At the moment, we're still using the subdivision surface. So in the viewport, we're still, up-resing our simulation. But what if we switch off subdivision surface? We then notice we don't actually get as nice of a displacement. What we can do is we can counteract this by adjusting our tessellation values. And so what it will do is it will subdivide at render time without having to do it in the viewport. So to bring this back to a slightly nicer look, is all we need to do is we need to reduce this minimum edge length. So reduce this to 1. We will then see we now get back to that nicely subdivided looking displacement without actually having to use a subdivision surface. And so then what we can do, we might find the displacement scale is a little bit too heavy. So we can bring this down and make it slightly smaller. There we go. It's looking far better than it did before. And we can take this off. And then we can just duplicate this Redshift object tag and then come back maybe into our camera. And now what we've done is we've started the process of building a really nice looking texture. And so again, Tuesday, we'll dive into it a lot more. We'll add a lot more details to it and maybe some hairs over the top as well. Oh. But this is just the starting point of how you can begin to light and texture. And already it's actually looking quite nice. And we've only spent kind of like maybe like 10 minutes on the actual rendering side of things. Do we have any questions? I am good to go, unless the guys have anything you want to add?
No, everything was beautiful. Not so many questions, though.
Yeah, everything.
Everyone is thrilled.
Brilliant stuff.
Cool. I'll share the project file too. So what I'll do when this uploads onto YouTube, I'll have a little look tomorrow, and I'll share the final one, which is, if I have it open, which will be this one here. I'll share this file for everyone, so you can have it and you can play around with it, and then be there next Tuesday if you want some Redshift lighting and texturing tips.
Oops.
I want to say out loud how I'm amazed by how you work with light, Elly. Like 2 light sources, and it's already phenomenally beautiful. Well, that's mastery. That is really cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm amazed.
That means a lot. It's something I want to be better at, is lighting, because I think it makes a big difference to scenes.
I'm amazed at the amount of time you artists put into making things look good. I was done at add a dome light. Let's get on with it.
No, it was done in no time. Actually, that was extremely fast. That's why that was
beautiful.
cool.
You are a great artist and a great artisan, Elly. And you know that I don't lie and I don't share compliments for nothing. So
I will treasure this forever. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll get you at some point. I will find. I'm looking very, very closely at your videos to see where you're going to trip up. I haven't found anything yet, but you know,
every stream ever.
Be aware, I'm watching you. But it's absolutely fantastic. I have to get on a serious note. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It means a lot, and thank you to everyone for their kind of questions and their messages. I hope they enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me hijack this week's DPP. It's been fun.
I want to say something now.
Of course.
Right. Is everyone done over there? Okay. So I'm going to tease something. Because in December, for 3 weeks, because the last week of December is holidays. Yay. I'm going to tease this. So mechanical rigging is coming to town. And amongst other things, we're going to see how to do things like these, how to do things like these, how to probably rig this as well. These and these. This is an interesting one. How to do a Delta printer, how to make helicopters and stuff like that. And I want to really, really thank Tilo that sent me this absolute gem of a model. And that's why your contributions are always very well received. And this from my very good friend, Chris Priddy. We're going to see how we're going to rig things like these. So December, and let me take this off. Teaser out. Where's my screen? There it is. No more teaser. December is going to be mechanical rigging, and I really want to name it rig any real plausible mechanical device. I think I'm very close to generalizing that. So watch out for the dates and all that. I just wanted to throw my own little thing in the mix, because you do such a great job, Elly, of attracting people's attention. I have to steal part of your glow, and there's still a lot left. Anyhow, so yeah, this was a great.
It all looks very cool, very, very cool.
Good. It's going to be cooler when I show it, because it's so simple. Once you nail down some principles, it's so simple. I mean, that's the stuff you show as well, that you get some very simple principles. How you're going to make the cloth, how you're going to make it move, how to control it, dampening, whatever. It doesn't take much if you have an idea. I don't have ideas, so I need to show complex things. That's where we differ quite a bit. But amazing presentation as usual.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and
thank you both for being here as well. Thank you for
the pleasure is mine.
Answering questions. It's always lovely to spend the time with you guys.
There were not so many actually. Maybe we're lucky not to receive AI related or maybe fluid related questions.
But always remember that you can always send questions, and my DMs are open. The request I have is please remove any third-party plugins, renderers, and all that, and send simplified versions of files where everything that doesn't participate in the problem or the expectation, please remove it. It just makes things so much easier. If it's not a texturing problem, remove textures. If it's not a simulation problem, remove simulations. And that way we can focus on providing you a solution. And the main thing we're doing here is making sure you can move forward with your ideas and not find technical bottlenecks when you want to do something. I'm not very creative, but for creative people, I know what a terrible bottleneck it is when a technical issue cannot be solved. So we're here to help you. And yeah, hope to see you all soon. Anything else?
No, I'm good. I'm good. We can say bye and see you all on a stream soon.
Yeah, are you going to do the closing? Do you want me to do the closing? Do you do closing? Housekeeping?
I'm so out of the loop that I do not do closing, but you can have the final words of closing if you like.
Yeah, I will do
today.
And there's a question. Where can I DM you? Oh, I'm at NosemanGR. One word. Noseman GR, because I'm Greek. You can follow me on Twitter and DM me, and yeah, you can throw your questions over there. Okay, let's do a housekeeping closer, just so I can earn my daily pay. Do something here. So first of all, for all events, present, past, and future, go to the events page, and you'll find all our shows and videos and so forth. There's tons of stuff to see, very entertaining and very educational. And the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, which hosts these after they're being presented live, and we host them on the Maxon Training Team. Although you can watch them live on the Maxon YouTube channel, the replays are going to be hosted on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe. And don't forget, watch the quick tips. It's 3 to 4 minutes max. I'm not even allowed to make 4 minutes. And they have so much information packed. According to a user lately, he wished he had known that 10 years ago. And yes, what I showed could be done 10 years ago. So watch them. It's 3 or 4 minutes once a week. And you will learn something. If you don't, let me know, and I'll have a chat with myself. So always make sure you check out ZBrush YouTube channel, because the amount of talking about artistry, the stuff that they do here is absolutely mind-blowing. So check it out, if anything else, to see how good ZBrush is. If you want to become a certified pro user or a certified trainer, check out the certifications page. And in the pro user certification, click on the certification links. And these are the general topics we would like you to be proficient at in order to pass the test. And it's also a good guide to find out what you could be looking at in order to assist your learning journey. Here at the topic list. It's a double post. Don't forget to go and get your swag. What was it again? It was
Maxon Simulation.
Maxon Simulations, all caps, one word. You pay for folding and envelopes and all that. But the t-shirt itself is free. Here is the series on Cineversity.com. Don't forget, go to Cineversity.com and watch hundreds of videos we have, or the old Cineversity, Cineversity.com. The new one is cineversity.maxon.net. And the old one is cineversity.com, where it has tens of thousands of videos. And make sure you check out Dr. Sassy's Tool Time, because it has so much knowledge on the majority of tools. And although they were made ages ago, the majority of the information is still relevant. It's a treasure trove of information. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say for now. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sandro, for being with us again. Thank you, Elly, for this magnificent presentation. Thank you
for having me.
Internet provider, for not cutting down any other trees or cables.
That was a quest.
Oh, it was interesting because it started with running around the house to see if any branch fell on the cables, then resetting the modem, then checking the website where there were no outages, then calling and waiting on the line, trying to connect through my cell at the same time while talking on the phone with the service, and then receiving the reply that they're working on it. It's going to be finished this afternoon. And it was done 5 minutes later. That was my wake-up call. I don't need any coffee now. I'm fired up. Again, I want to thank all our amazing viewers. It's your questions that make our shows. It's your viewership that puts value on the work we do. So please share these links. Tell your friends and colleagues to watch these shows. And if there's nothing more to learn, at least they're entertaining, I hope.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.